In Victorian England, saying, "I do," came with a rule book thicker than the Bible and twice as petty. No eating peas with your knife. Never stand where your shadow might fall on a lady's dress. And for heaven's sake, don't sit with your back to a window. Apparently, that's how scandals are born. Break the wrong one, and you weren't just embarrassed. You were erased. People stopped greeting you. Invitations vanished. It was like someone turned your social life into a ghost story. So if you're here quietly listening without subscribing, well, you're basically loitering in my Victorian drawing room without introducing yourself. Click subscribe. It's the polite thing to do. Now, what time is it where you are? Drop your time and place in the comments. Every so often I spot someone listening from New Zealand at 4 a.m. and think, do you people ever sleep? Now, settle in. Adjust your blanket. Get comfortable. Where we're going, you'll want to be very, very cozy. You wake to the sound of the city, though sound might be generous. It's more a muffled shuffle of boots on cobblestones, the distant clip of a carriage wheel over a loose paving stone, the kind of noise that seeps through thin glass and heavy drapes. Light presses through lace curtains, filtered into polite little squares on the worn floorboards. Your coal fire, barely more than a faint orange sigh, has done what it could overnight, which is to say, not much. The air is cold enough that your breath ghosts in the dimness. But you're Victorian, so you don't flinch. Or at least you try not to, because even shivering too obviously at breakfast could be read as poor form. You sit up, and already you are in performance mode. No one may be watching, yet, but etiquette isn't an on-off switch. It's the water you swim in. Even the angle at which you swing your feet from the bed matters. Shoes and stockings must go on in a way that would never make the maid wince. And your dressing gown? It must be pulled tight and knotted neatly, not hanging open like a careless dock worker's coat. Because here's the thing. Etiquette isn't just manners. It's currency. It's survival. A tradesman might earn a living with his hands. You earn yours with perception, how others see you, or more importantly, how they choose to remember you. The wrong impression given at the wrong moment, and you'll find your name has vanished from dinner lists, your calling card mysteriously lost behind the silver tray. You glance around your bedroom, a washstand with its porcelain basin and ewer, cold water waiting for your morning ablutions, a dressing table where your hairbrush sits bristles up, ready to tame the night's pillow-pressed waves into something presentable. And, depending on your place in the social ladder, perhaps a servant hovering just outside the door, waiting for the right moment to enter, not too soon, which would be intrusive, not too late, which would be inattentive. Their timing, like yours, is part of the daily choreography. Even stretching has its place. You rise, straighten your spine, and if you must loosen your shoulders, you do it in a restrained, deliberate way. A languid cat-like yawn, acceptable, but only if no one can hear it. Victorian England is a world where private behavior still risks public consequences because someone is always ready to talk. Through the lace curtains, you can just see the street below. A delivery boy passes, arms full of wrapped parcels, cap askew. Across the way, a neighbor's maid is beating a rug in the small backyard, sending little puffs of dust into the morning air. The city is waking up, and so is its scrutiny. You're aware that the day ahead will be a minefield of unwritten rules. Which fork to use at luncheon, how far to incline your head when greeting the vicar, whether you may walk unchaperoned to the milliner's, and if so, At what time of day without risking whispers? Even breakfast isn't safe. If you're at the upper end of society, the table will be laid with toast racks, marmalade, and eggs under silver domes. And heaven help you if you butter your bread in one sweeping motion instead of the approved bite-sized method. If you're lower down the ladder, perhaps it's bread and dripping in a cramped kitchen. But even there, posture and politeness have trickled down from upstairs. As you stand, you feel the weight of the day's costume ahead. Corset laces pulled snug or waistcoat buttons fastened with precise symmetry. Each garment a piece of armor, each detail a signal to the watching world. Even choosing what color to wear before noon has implications. Too bright and you're seen as vulgar. Too somber and someone might whisper that you're in mourning without proper cause. You haven't yet spoken a word, and already the etiquette ledger is filling. In the Victorian world, to live is to curate. Every glance, every gesture, every silence, it all feeds into the grand account of your respectability. One misstep, and the whole balance can tilt. So, as you tie the final bow on your morning attire, take a last look around your room. The fire may be low, the air crisp, but you have your armor. You have your script. And in this city, that's the only real warmth you're going to get. Before you've even opened your bedroom door, you are already under observation. Not by society at large, not yet, but by something far more immediate and impossible to escape, the household itself. Victorian homes have their own nervous systems. Every stair tread that creaks, every door latch that clicks, every muffled footstep along the corridor sends information pulsing through its veins. The messengers, your servants. And no, this isn't about sinister eavesdropping for the sake of malice. Not always, anyway. This is about the servant network, that informal, lightning-fast system of domestic intelligence that thrives in every respectable home. Information in, information out. A well-run house could carry a piece of gossip from the attic to the kitchen faster than the telegraph could send it to Manchester. Downstairs, in the kitchen's warm, yeasty air, your maid is already aware that you stirred later than usual. She knows, because she heard the coals shift in your grate when you prodded them. A sound she's catalogued alongside dozens of others in her mental almanac of your habits. A quick glance at the hallway clock confirms it. You are a full 20 minutes behind your usual schedule. And here's where etiquette begins before the front door is even in sight. In the Victorian home, the household staff are part of your public face. They carry impressions, stories, and stray remarks to other households through tradesmen, visiting maids, coachmen chatting at the mews. What you do here in your so-called private space can stroll out into the neighborhood before you've had your first cup of tea. Slip down to breakfast in slippers instead of shoes. That small breach of decorum might be retold gently or not so gently in a laundry yard conversation later that afternoon. Raise your voice at a sibling or speak too familiarly to a visitor at the door. It could drift across town by supper. You might never know the source, but the result could be one less invitation on your silver tray next season. The walls themselves play their part. A Victorian house amplifies sound in the most inconvenient ways. Floorboards transmit the pattern of your tread, confident, rushed, hesitant. The banister betrays whether you glide down the stairs or drag your hand along in fatigue. Even the click of a teacup onto its saucer in the drawing room can be heard in the scullery, and all of it is absorbed, noted, stored. To you, the house may feel safe. To the maid, the butler, the footman, it is a workplace full of status signals. They see which visitors are kept waiting, which letters are opened with haste, which parcels you inspect with unguarded delight. They notice the quality of your gloves when you return from an outing, and whether the soles of your boots are muddy or spotless. Each detail is another line in the living ledger of your household reputation. So when Victorians say charity begins at home, they might also mean so does gossip. This is why etiquette manuals stressed not only public manners, but private ones. Because in truth, there was very little difference. Late rising wasn't just about laziness. It hinted at disorganization, lack of discipline, even moral weakness. Dressing too casually for breakfast didn't merely offend an imaginary style committee, it suggested a lax household, which by extension reflected poorly on your entire family. The servant network didn't have to be malicious to be dangerous. In fact, much of its power lay in its casualness. A word here while fetching milk. A remark there when delivering a parcel to a neighbor's kitchen. And remember, many servants came from the same villages, had relatives in other great houses, and crossed paths constantly in the markets. By the time you've stepped into the corridor outside your bedroom, you are already walking through a stage set where every supporting actor has a perfect view of your lines and cues. If you falter, someone notices. If you shine, someone notices. And either way, the story will travel. This is why, in the Victorian era, etiquette began before you even greeted another soul. It began the moment you were audible, so you adjust your dressing gown properly before turning the doorknob. You hold your chin just so, in case anyone catches sight of you from the far end of the hall. And you move with the kind of deliberate care that says, I am entirely in control of my morning, even if you've only been awake for 12 minutes and your hair is still conspiring against you. You haven't even left the house yet, but already the rules are watching, which, by the way, is a lot like my subscribers list. I notice when you're here. If you're listening and not subscribed, you're basically loitering in my front hall without leaving a calling card. At least put your name down before you vanish. Before you step into the world, you must be fitted for battle. And in Victorian England, your armor is fabric, layer upon layer, calculated not for comfort or practicality, but for social defense. This is not simply getting dressed. This is strategic outfitting, a morning ritual where every thread is an argument for your respectability. A successful ensemble tells the watching world, I understand my place, I understand your place, and I am dressed accordingly. You begin with the foundation, a chemise, drawers, stockings, the soft private layer no one outside the household will see, yet it sets the tone. A good Victorian understands that what is hidden is still political. A frayed hem or mismatched garter hints at carelessness, and carelessness is a dangerous scent for others to catch. Next, the corset. This is your cuirass, your breastplate. It will dictate how you move, how you breathe, and, in a sense, how you think for the rest of the day. It is not optional. Without it, your posture will slump, your silhouette will betray you, and you will find yourself the subject of whispers before luncheon. Over that comes the petticoat, or petticoats, plural, if the season or fashion demands it. They are your under armor padding, your insulation against both chill and judgment. They swish faintly as you move, announcing your presence in the subtle percussion of propriety. Now, the gown. But not any gown. Mourning is its own territory with strict laws. A morning dress is higher at the neck, longer in the sleeve, sober in tone. If you appear before noon in something too bright or too bare, you may as well have arrived carrying a placard that says, "I do not know the rules." Afternoon attire shifts the tone. Necklines lower slightly, fabrics soften, colors warm. The social code is so intricate that in some circles, a person could tell the time of day purely from the cut and color of your sleeves. Imagine needing a manual to tell you your sleeves are too optimistic for this hour. And yet, here we are. Accessories are weapons too. Gloves, for example, are as essential as oxygen. You wear them outdoors, indoors, sometimes even at table. They are not merely decorative, they are proof you have the means to keep your hands protected from labor. Choose the wrong shade for the wrong time of day, and you might as well have shouted in the street. Your hat or bonnet is more than sun protection. It is your social headline, the first line of your personal advertisement. Too plain and you risk seeming dowdy. Too elaborate and you risk being called vulgar. This too is a balancing act you must master before your boots touch the pavement. And then there's outerwear, a shawl or mantle in winter, perhaps a light jacket in summer. Again, not merely for warmth, but for signaling your ability to own a garment suited to each season and occasion. Now let's step sideways for a moment, into the mind of the person who likely laid these garments out for you, your lady's maid. She knows the rules as well as you do, perhaps better. She has dressed you for seasons, seen the subtle shift in fabrics from year to year. She has buttoned and fastened and pinned your reputation together, one hook and eye at a time. But she will not comment. She cannot. The unspoken etiquette between mistress and maid is its own tightrope. She may think that the trim on your morning bodice is just slightly last season, but she will hold her tongue. She will raise an eyebrow only when your back is turned, and perhaps, later that evening, murmur her observation in the safety of the servants' hall. And that, in turn, may be repeated to the butler in another house, and from there to the cook in yet another, until someone in a drawing room across town hears that Mrs. So-and-so has not kept up with the Paris trimmings this year, and that someone will file it away for when you next cross their threshold. It's exhausting, isn't it? But there's no way around it. Dressing in Victorian society is not about self-expression. It is about fitting precisely into the narrow slot carved for you by birth, fortune, and gender, and knowing that every ruffle, button, and stitch is being appraised. Once dressed, you stand before the mirror. The image staring back at you is not entirely your own. It's part you, part tailor, part etiquette manual, part silent judgment of half the people you know. You smooth your sleeves, adjust your gloves, and feel the weight of fabric as the weight of expectation. Outside, the streets are waiting, but they are merciful compared to the scrutiny that begins at home. By the time you reach your front door, you are armored, inspected, and, if you've done it right, unassailable. Almost. By the time you descend to breakfast, you've already passed the first inspection of the day, your clothing. Now comes the second test, how you conduct yourself in the morning performance. Because that's exactly what breakfast is. Not a casual meal, but a daily production staged with more precision than a West End play. You may feel groggy, but the household expects nothing less than perfect execution. If you're upper class, the breakfast room is arranged with deliberate formality. The table is long, the silverware polished until it's practically blinding, and the seating plan is as rigid as the monarchy itself. The most important person, often the master or mistress of the house, presides at the head. Their position is not just about convenience, it's a visible reminder of hierarchy. You do not sit where you please. Your seat is determined by status, age, gender, and sometimes by the subtle politics of who's speaking to whom that week. Choose the wrong chair, and you'll make an unspoken announcement to the room. I do not understand my place. The atmosphere at breakfast is measured. There is conversation, yes, but nothing too animated. This is not the time for loud stories or hearty laughter. Too much cheer is vulgar. It suggests you are either an actor or a tradesman with something to sell. The preferred tone is light, restrained, and agreeable. Think, comment on the weather levels of safe. If you have something amusing to share, you ration it carefully, like sugar in wartime. A short, tasteful anecdote is acceptable. Anything that risks prolonged mirth? Save it for later, preferably for when the servants aren't in earshot to repeat it downstairs. The tea pouring ritual is its own minefield. If you are seated close enough to the teapot, you may be asked to serve. This is not an honor so much as an exam. You must pour without spilling. Offer the cup with the handle turned toward the drinker, and never, under any circumstances, fill your own cup first. The etiquette books are clear. Others' needs take precedence. That is, unless the mistress of the house is present, in which case she alone controls the teapot, like a monarch with her scepter. If tea is served alongside coffee, your choice between the two is also noted. Tea suggests steadiness and refinement. Coffee leans toward cosmopolitan, perhaps even dangerously modern. Too much preference for coffee, and someone may raise an eyebrow about where you've been traveling. As for food, the spread is generous, but not for you to treat like a buffet. You take what is offered in the sequence it is offered. Reaching for a dish before it comes to you, or, heaven forbid, asking for something not on the table, is a breach of manners. And if kippers or eggs are served, you eat them with the correct utensil. The wrong one marks you as either provincial or willfully rebellious, neither of which wins friends at this hour. Meanwhile, at the other end of society, breakfast plays out on a different stage, smaller, but with its own brand of scrutiny. In a middle-class household, the room may be modest, the furniture practical, but the desire to mirror upper-class etiquette is fierce. The table might be shorter, but seat placement still carries weight. Father sits at the head, mother opposite, children arranged in age order. The eldest son sits closest to father, the better to absorb manly conversation. Conversation here is often even more restrained. Middle-class mornings are practical affairs. There is work to be done, and lingering over the meal is a luxury. But the rules are still there, compressed into the smaller space. Napkins are placed neatly on laps. Bread is sliced and passed, not grabbed. Even the youngest children learn to wait their turn, because manners are seen as the family's calling card. Tea in the middle-class home is just as much a signal of respectability. The teapot may be pewter instead of silver, but it is polished. The pouring rules are the same. Others first, yourself last. And while the food may be humbler, bread, porridge, perhaps a bit of bacon on good days, the expectation of grace and composure remains. It's worth noting that breakfast, whether upstairs or down, is less about nourishment and more about presentation. You are being read, silently, constantly, by those around you. The way you hold your cup, the way you break your bread, the pauses you leave between speaking, all of it forms a silent dossier in the minds of the people you live with. And those people? They talk. The lady's maid may have reported on your choice of bonnet yesterday. The butler may now be noting how you stirred your tea before offering sugar to anyone else. In a society obsessed with manners, the breakfast table is both courtroom and theater, a place where you are judged, and a place where you must convincingly perform the role assigned to you. So, you sit, sip, and smile at the right moments. You leave a small amount of food on your plate, an understated signal that you are above hunger. You stand only when it is appropriate, push your chair back without scraping, and thank the person nearest you before leaving the room. If you've managed all this without misstep, you have passed the morning's second inspection. But be warned, the day has barely begun, and the streets outside are an even bigger stage. You've made it through breakfast without scandal. Well done. Unfortunately, you now face the true minefield of the Victorian day, the greeting. Because in this era, how you acknowledge another human being is not a casual decision. It's a calculation. One small misjudgment, and you could cause offense that lasts for years, or worse, ruin a marriage prospect before it even exists. Let's start with the basics. If you're a gentleman greeting another gentleman of your rank, a handshake may be acceptable, but only if you are on familiar terms. It is not the casual "how do you do" of the 21st century. The Victorian handshake is measured, firm but not crushing, with precisely 2 to 3 pumps. Anything longer and you look over-eager. Anything weaker and you appear insincere. Ladies, however, are not meant to offer their hand at all, unless the gentleman is a close family friend or of sufficiently high social standing that such contact would not cause whispers. If you do offer your hand, it should be gloved, unless you are indoors in a private setting. Bare hand contact in public could be read as forward, and forwardness is the quickest route to being the subject of drawing room gossip. For those not shaking hands, there is the bow, curtsy, and head inclination. Gentlemen bow from the neck, not the waist, unless meeting someone of much higher status, in which case a deeper bow is warranted. But here's the subtlety. The depth of your bow is a public statement about your relationship. Bow too deeply to someone of equal rank, and you seem servile. Bow too shallow to someone above you, and you risk being labeled arrogant. Ladies, your curtsy is similarly loaded with meaning. It is small and controlled, knees bending just enough to lower your height slightly, skirts held delicately to the sides, eyes down, but not so far down you seem ashamed to be seen. The curtsy is not just politeness. It is a visible declaration of your breeding. Then there's the head inclination, the smallest gesture of all, but possibly the most treacherous. This is the move you deploy when passing someone you know slightly, or when greeting at a distance. It is a fractional nod, performed without breaking stride, designed to acknowledge without inviting prolonged conversation. A millimeter too much movement, and you appear overly familiar. Too little, and you look dismissive. Now, about the bizarre rules. There's one that often leaves modern ears baffled. Never bow from a window. Why? Because to bow from a window is to display yourself like merchandise. A proper introduction should happen face to face, on the same physical plane, not shouted down from a first-floor drawing room while you lean out like a shop sign. Doing so brands you as gauche, rural, or tragically unaware of propriety. And while we're on the subject of ruinous mistakes, imagine this scenario. You are introduced to the relative of a wealthy family friend at a garden party. You greet them with a handshake when a curtsy was expected. Or you incline your head too casually, implying familiarity you do not have. Word travels quickly. By the time you're home, your name has already been attached to the phrases lacking polish and not quite the thing. These mistakes are not merely embarrassing, they can be socially fatal. The wrong greeting signals that you either don't know the rules, which makes you untrustworthy in polite society, or worse, that you do know the rules, but are deliberately disregarding them. Either one is enough for a vigilant mother to cross you off her mental list of acceptable matches for her children. Remember, in Victorian society, introductions are a form of currency. They are the first impression upon which your entire reputation may rest. One error in those first seconds can close doors that would have taken years to open. So you proceed carefully. If you're a gentleman, you wait for a lady to extend her hand before attempting contact. If she doesn't, you bow, but not too deeply. If you're a lady, you measure the relationship in your mind before offering your hand or curtsying, and if unsure, you err on the side of restraint. It's a choreography, a slow, silent dance of glances, gestures, and posture. And much like the waltz, one wrong step is impossible to hide. By the time you've navigated your morning greeting successfully, you've expended as much energy as a modern person spends on an entire workday. But congratulations, your social life is still intact. For now. If you're listening and not subscribed, you're basically loitering in my front hall without leaving a calling card. At least put your name down before you vanish. Your gloves are on. Your greetings survived unscathed. But the real game of Victorian social life hasn't even started. It's played not at the dining table or in the ballroom, but at the door. And the weapon of choice? A small piece of stiff paper no larger than a hand, the calling card. Do not be fooled by its size. This is not an idle accessory. It is a declaration of who you are, your social rank, your affiliations, and whether you have the faintest chance of ever being invited back. Think of it as a resume, a passport, and a performance review, all condensed into one rectangle with your name printed in elegant script. Your first task is ensuring the card is perfect. Not merely clean, perfect. No bent corners, no smudged ink, no frayed edges from being stuffed carelessly into a coat pocket. A gentleman's card should read simply, Mr. Henry P. Wentworth, in firm black type, centered. A lady's card may be slightly smaller, with her full name, or, if married, her husband's name, accompanied by her address for the efficient return of calls. But it's not enough to simply hand it over. The folding of the card speaks a language all its own, a secret code understood by everyone worth knowing. A top right fold? That means you called in person and the lady or gentleman was at home. A top left fold? You called and they were not at home. Folded lengthwise? A formal call of condolence. Folded crosswise? Congratulations, usually for a wedding or birth. And heaven help you if you fold the wrong corner. Imagine meaning to convey sympathy, but instead implying you stopped by for idle gossip. That kind of slip would be discussed over tea for weeks. Of course, you do not personally hand your card to the master or mistress of the house. No. It is accepted by the true power in this equation, the servant at the door. This servant, usually the butler in a grand house, or a parlor maid in a smaller one, is the gatekeeper to the mistress's social calendar. You may think you are leaving your card for her. In reality, you are leaving it to be judged, and judged it will be. The butler, with one glance, can assess your handwriting, your paper stock, even whether the ink feels fresh or has been sitting in a drawer too long. He will take your card to the mistress, but not before mentally filing it alongside your previous visits and any rumors he's overheard. Here's where the parallel POV comes in, below stairs. Down in the servants' hall, the stack of calling cards is more than just clutter. It is a running tally of the household's social orbit. The housemaid who dusts the hall table knows which cards have lingered there unreturned for too long, meaning the mistress has no intention of calling back. The cook, overhearing at dinner, may mutter that Mrs. Frobisher's card is still sitting there from Michaelmas. And the butler? He knows exactly which cards go straight to the mistress's sitting room and which go to a discreet little drawer, the purgatory of unwanted social ties. Returning calls is its own delicate ballet. If you leave a card and the recipient wishes to acknowledge you, they must send their own within a few days. Too quick a return, and it seems desperate. Too slow, and it appears grudging. Failure to return a call at all is a clear signal. This connection is over. For you, the newcomer, this means navigating a precise schedule. Monday afternoons might be set aside for at-home hours, the socially acceptable window in which you can leave cards without intruding. Arrive outside of these hours, and you risk catching the household in disarray, or worse, at luncheon, which would be a mark against you before your card even touched the hall table. In the middle class, the ritual is condensed but still deadly serious. You might only have a handful of cards printed each year, so you choose recipients carefully. A misplaced card here could mean wasting your one chance to get into the orbit of the wealthier family down the street. And if you think any of this is exaggerated, consider that entire marriages, business partnerships, and lifelong friendships were brokered through the rhythm of calling cards. They were the filters through which all social interaction passed, not unlike the way modern people assess you by your email signature, except with a much higher risk of ostracism. So you stand at the door, hand your card to the servant, and step back into the street, knowing you've just played your move in a very slow, very silent game. You will know in a week whether you advanced or whether your card went to that quiet drawer where social hopes go to die. One thing is certain, in Victorian England, you are never just visiting. You are always being measured. And sometimes it's the smallest object, not the grandest gesture, that decides your fate. You step out of the front door, gloves smoothed, hat tilted at the acceptable angle. Congratulations, you've made it into the street without committing a social offense inside the house. Unfortunately, that was the easy part. Now you have to walk, in public, without drawing the wrong sort of attention. And yes, there's a right and a wrong way to walk. In Victorian England, even the pace of your stride could be read like a personal advertisement. Too fast, and you looked coarse, impatient, perhaps even desperate. Too slow, and you risked appearing idle or, worse, unwell, which could lead to whispered speculation about your constitution. For men, the stride should be purposeful, but never hurried. The confident gait of a gentleman who has business to attend to, but not so urgent that he'd break into anything resembling a run. A gentleman running in public was practically an admission of guilt. You might as well carry a sign reading, "I am fleeing scandal." For women, the rules were far more exacting. Your steps should be short, deliberate, and above all, graceful. No swinging your arms, no stomping. You move as if gliding, even when the cobblestones are uneven and your shoes are pinching. The hem of your skirt should lift only slightly with each step, revealing nothing but the tips of your boots. And even that was sometimes considered bold. And then there's the matter of positioning. If you are a woman walking with a man, you keep to the inside of the pavement, that is, farther from the road. This is not for safety from carriages, as you might assume, but rather to protect your skirts from the filth of the street. Let him take the splashes from passing wheels. That's what the exterior position is for. If the man is your husband, this is all perfectly respectable. If he is your brother or a known relative, still fine. But if he is not your husband and not your close kin, now the eyes of the street are on you. A woman in public with an unrelated man risked instant speculation. Was he courting her? Was this an illicit arrangement? Were they walking too closely? Propriety demanded a careful space between you, enough for a chaperone to slip in if one were available. And if anyone of consequence happened to pass by, both of you should be ready to adjust your pace and expression to something safely neutral. A little too much smiling could suggest familiarity, and familiarity could suggest scandal. Of course, walking alone as a woman came with its own hazards. The unspoken assumption was that a respectable woman didn't simply wander about without purpose. You were either on your way to pay a call, running an errand, or heading to church. Anything else, strolling aimlessly, pausing to look in shop windows, could be taken as a sign you were inviting conversation from strangers. And conversation from strangers in the Victorian street was never innocent. Which brings us to the art of acknowledgement. The moment you spot an acquaintance, whether across the street or coming toward you, you must respond correctly. A gentleman tips his hat, a slight lowering with the hand, never a dramatic sweep. A lady offers a brief incline of the head, perhaps the smallest flicker of a smile. Anything more enthusiastic risks drawing attention from passers-by. There are strict boundaries here. You never call out a greeting in the street. Shouting someone's name across the road was considered both vulgar and disruptive. In fact, etiquette books explicitly warned against acknowledging anyone from a window. An act seen as so improper, it bordered on the theatrical. If you saw a friend while looking out of your drawing room window, you were expected to pretend not to have noticed. And heaven forbid you make the opposite mistake, failing to acknowledge someone you should recognize. That could be taken as a deliberate snub, the kind of silent insult that could freeze an acquaintance out of your circle for years. Which means that while walking, you must keep a constant, subtle scan of your surroundings. Who is approaching? Who is within bowing distance? And whether they are of a rank worth acknowledging. Men had their own hazards to watch for. Walking too closely beside a lady to whom they were not related could lead to accusations of forwardness. Walking too far ahead of their wives was equally poor form, implying impatience or indifference. The correct position was side by side, adjusted, of course, to keep her on the inside of the pavement. Middle-class streets followed the same rules, just in slightly narrower spaces. Instead of wide boulevards, you had to navigate tight rows of shop fronts, weaving between delivery carts and errand boys, without ever appearing flustered. Even here, the invisible network of eyes, shopkeepers, neighbors, the baker's wife, could relay your conduct to half the neighborhood before you reach the corner. So, you proceed along the pavement with careful precision, your pace measured, your head held just so, your eyes scanning for anyone requiring acknowledgement. Every step is part of the performance. And somewhere behind a lace curtain, someone is already taking note of whether you played your role well enough to warrant an invitation to their next afternoon tea. Because in Victorian England, walking down the street wasn't just about getting from one place to another. It was a moving stage, and you were always on display. You have errands to run, or rather, errands to be seen running. Because in Victorian England, shopping wasn't just about acquiring goods. It was a public display of your taste, restraint, and social rank. You step out with your gloves in place and your parasol angled just so, heading toward the row of respectable shops. This isn't a matter of popping into any random doorway. Oh no. You are expected to frequent the right shops, and in the right order. A true lady would never begin her morning at the butcher's. One started with the draper or the milliner, something genteel, before progressing to the more practical purchases. The market itself is a small theater. Shop windows are curated like invitations, and you, the customer, are as much on display as the wares. People notice where you shop, who you greet, and how you carry yourself between doorways. Inside the shop, the rules become even more exact. First, you greet the shopkeeper or clerk, not too warmly, not too coolly. You acknowledge their bow or curtsy without seeming either overly familiar or dismissive. The transaction is a dance, with lines clearly drawn. They serve, you select. But you mustn't appear to scrutinize items too closely, lest you seem suspicious of their quality, or worse, as though you doubt their honesty. And here's the critical thing. In a respectable establishment, you do not touch goods without permission. A lady requests to have an item shown to her. You point, you describe, and the shopkeeper presents it for inspection. Handling bolts of cloth or tipping over hats without assistance would be almost as scandalous as overturning a tea table. Now, let's address the danger of browsing. In the modern world, wandering through a store without buying anything is normal. In the Victorian world, it was practically a declaration of stinginess or poor fortune. If you asked to see several items and then left without a purchase, you might as well have pinned a note to your back reading, "Cannot afford." Word could travel via servants, shop staff, or nosy passers-by faster than you could get home. This is why you might find yourself buying something small, even if you didn't need it. A handkerchief, perhaps, or a ribbon. Something inexpensive, but enough to mark the visit as legitimate. Your posture is part of the performance. You do not lean on counters. You do not fuss with your gloves while speaking. Your voice remains low, your sentences short. Prolonged conversations risk holding up other customers, which could be seen as inconsiderate, unless, of course, you are intentionally displaying your influence by keeping the shopkeeper's attention. Yes, even dawdling could be weaponized as social theater. Men had their own version of this etiquette. A gentleman entering a shop removed his hat immediately, greeted the proprietor, and often conducted his business briskly. Lingering too long in a shop that catered to ladies' fashions could be interpreted as improper. Unless naturally, he was there to select a gift for his wife or sister, in which case he must clearly state that intention at once. And remember, the shopping trip didn't begin and end with you. Parallel to your own careful choices, the servant sent ahead with a list was performing their own act, ensuring the best produce was selected without haggling too obviously, securing goods on account without appearing to question your ability to pay. Their discretion was part of your reputation. A servant known for sharp bargaining might make you seem miserly. In the middle-class version of this ritual, the etiquette remained, but the stakes were closer to home. The butcher's boy might also deliver your coal, and the grocer's wife might be your neighbor's cousin. Any slip, a late payment, a visible argument over price, would ripple through your immediate circle before the day was out, and so you step back into the street with your parcels, your purchases deliberate and visible. To anyone passing, you have just completed the kind of perfectly respectable morning outing that signals stability, taste, and social awareness. The truth? You might not have needed half of it, but Victorian life was rarely about need. It was about display, and display required careful staging, even for the most ordinary act of buying a pound of tea. Because in this world, even shopping was part of your resume, and heaven help you if the market decided you failed the interview. Which is how I feel when you watch these videos without subscribing. I see you. You take the goods, you enjoy the service, and you stroll away without so much as a nod. Fix that before the gossip spreads. Travel in Victorian England isn't just about getting from point A to point B. It's a moving stage where the smallest slip could earn you whispers before you'd even reached your destination. You step outside into the London fog, gloves buttoned, hat angled correctly, and immediately face your first decision: carriage or rail. The choice alone speaks volumes. A private carriage says stability, independence, and that you can afford a driver who knows your habits better than you do. Public transport, however, says practicality. Unless, of course, you end up sitting in the wrong place. First rule: men remove their hats in certain spaces, entering a covered railway platform, for instance, or stepping inside a public waiting room. But here's the catch. Some men didn't just remove them out of politeness. They used the gesture to acknowledge those present, almost like a portable bow. Forget to do it, and you risk looking boorish. Do it too flamboyantly, and you risk looking theatrical. Carriage travel came with its own labyrinth of rules. Seating hierarchies were as rigid as military ranks. If you are a lady, you never take the seat with your back to the horses unless you are the lowest-ranking person present, which, of course, you hope you aren't. The most prestigious seat, facing forward on the far side from the driver's bench. Gentlemen were expected to offer the more comfortable positions to ladies, but only if those ladies were of appropriate acquaintance. Offer too eagerly to a stranger, and you could seem presumptuous. Fail to offer at all, and you could seem cold. Your attire mattered almost as much as your seat. You wouldn't wear a bright silk day gown for rail travel any more than you'd wear your gardening dress to a court ball. For a woman, special travel attire, sturdy fabrics, muted colors, and a bonnet that could survive the soot was essential. For a man, a clean but subdued suit was expected. You dressed not just for yourself, but to signal that you understood the seriousness of moving through public space. Now we arrive at one of Victorian travel's most curious contradictions: railway courtesy. On city streets or in drawing rooms, men were expected to give up seats to women, a gesture of chivalry. But on trains, different story. Rail travel was considered a private ticketed transaction. Once you had your seat, it was yours. Men did not routinely give them up for women unless the woman was elderly or clearly unwell. To modern ears, that sounds like an odd suspension of the chivalry code. But in Victorian thinking, trains were a more commercial environment than a social one. The railway carriage itself was a microcosm of society. You did not strike up casual conversation unless properly introduced, even if you were facing one another for the entire journey. Eye contact was kept brief. If a lady was traveling alone, she might arrange to be accompanied by a maid or a male relative to avoid the appearance of impropriety. In mixed company, conversations were low and polite. No loud declarations about your business or your opinion on the latest political scandal. Boarding and alighting came with their own miniature ceremonies. A gentleman always allowed ladies to step into or out of the carriage first. But if the platform was narrow, he might step down ahead to offer a steadying hand. And yes, there were rules for how that hand was taken. Lightly, without gripping, and without lingering more than the bare moment needed for balance. And beware the station porter, a silent witness to your travel manners. They could be a helpful ally or a source of gossip. A traveler who tipped too little or too obviously showed poor form. The right coin, discreetly passed, was the mark of someone raised well. Even your luggage spoke for you. Scuffed, mismatched cases could hint at carelessness, or worse, declining fortunes. Well-to-do travelers often had monogram trunks, and having too many of them could imply status just as much as having the right clothes could. In the Victorian world, travel wasn't an escape from etiquette. It was etiquette in motion. Every platform, every carriage seat, every hat removal was another chance to prove you belonged in the right circles, or to fail in front of a captive audience. So, whether you are stepping into a railway compartment or settling into a cushioned corner of a private carriage, remember, you aren't just going somewhere. You're taking your reputation for the ride. You think afternoon tea is about relaxation? Oh no. In Victorian England, it's about survival. By the time the clock strikes 4, you've already stepped into an unspoken audition, not for a job, but for your place in the hierarchy of the drawing room. Every movement you make, from the angle of your teacup to the order in which you accept sandwiches, is silently catalogued and weighed. You enter the parlor, and the first thing you notice is seating. This is not casual. The hostess subtly decides your rank by where she directs you. Closest to her means either high esteem or intense scrutiny. The farthest seat may signal you are an afterthought. You lower yourself into your place with the calculated grace of someone who knows even a chair can be a statement. Then comes the silent ranking system. If you are offered tea before others, congratulations. You've made the upper tier today. If the tray of pastries passes you last, you've slipped a rung, and God forbid you serve yourself before the hostess offers. You might as well declare social bankruptcy. Pouring tea is not just pouring tea. If you are the hostess, you demonstrate poise by never overfilling a cup, never spilling a drop, and, most importantly, never asking, milk first or tea first. That question is a minefield. The correct answer depends entirely on which social set you're trying to impress. For the guest, your task is simpler but no less dangerous. Hold your cup just so, saucer level, and sip without audible slurping. You might imagine conversation would relax you. Wrong again. The list of forbidden topics is long. Illness, politics, religion, and money are all off limits. Too much frankness, and you risk being labeled coarse. Too much silence, and you risk seeming dull. Instead, you engage in small talk as strategic weaponry. Weather, fashion, travel. You drop just enough detail to suggest sophistication, but not enough to invite deeper questions you can't answer without tripping over a taboo. You're also navigating the invisible web of who speaks to whom. Over-attentiveness to one guest can be seen as favoritism. Ignoring another could brand you as rude. You pass the sugar without overextending your arm. You laugh softly at the right moments, and you nod to the hostess just enough to show gratitude without appearing sycophantic. Meanwhile, downstairs, another war is being fought. In the kitchen, the staff is in a blur of motion. Trays are polished until you could check your reflection in them. Cucumber sandwiches are trimmed with the precision of military drill. The water for the tea is kept at exactly the right temperature, too hot, and it scalds, too cool, and it insults. Servants are timed to glide in at the perfect moment, replenish the table, and disappear without drawing attention. If you're in a great house, the butler might quietly orchestrate this ballet, signaling to footmen when to step forward. In a middle-class home, it might be one or two servants doing the work of five, juggling kettles, pastries, and polished manners of their own. And they notice things. They see who takes 2 scones instead of 1, who forgets to pass the sugar, who lingers over the tea urn as though they own it. Back upstairs, you keep your posture immaculate, elbows in, wrists straight, ankles crossed, while balancing a delicate teacup and a conversation you can't afford to botch. You're performing, even if you pretend you're not. The irony? In an age when the empire was sprawling across continents, commanding armies and industries, some of the fiercest battles were fought over teaspoons, teacups, and seating arrangements. And you, whether you like it or not, are a soldier in that war. By the time the final biscuit is gone and the cups are collected, you've survived. You rose, sat, sipped, and spoke exactly as the unwritten rules demanded. You've passed today's test. Tomorrow, another battlefield awaits. Dinner in Victorian England isn't just a meal, it's theater. And you're about to walk onto the stage. You don't simply sit where you like. A seating chart has been devised, carefully, to reflect and reinforce the invisible ladder of social rank. The most important guests are flanking the host and hostess. You, depending on your place in the pecking order, may be up near the spotlight, or exiled down toward the far end of the table, where the soup arrives lukewarm and the host's conversation never reaches. As you take your seat, don't pull your chair too far forward. In this world, even the act of sitting is choreographed. Napkin on the lap immediately, but not so early that it seems impatient. Now, the rules. Oh, there are rules. The bizarre food laws could fill a small novel. You do not, ever, put a knife into your mouth. That's barbaric. A knife is for cutting, not for conveying food. And those peas? No stabbing. You are expected to scoop them with the back of your fork, as if the fork were a delicate silver shovel. If you drop them, pretend it never happened. Soup is another minefield. You sip, silently, by tilting the spoon away from you. Any slurping, even the gentlest, brands you as uncultured. And heaven forbid you ask for seconds unless the host offers. To request more is to confess you came hungry. And in this theater, hunger is unbecoming. The courses arrive in a slow, deliberate sequence. Fish, entree, roast, pudding. You must pace yourself, knowing each plate is both nourishment and performance. The wrong choice, refusing a dish too pointedly, eating too quickly, will be noted. While you're focused on not humiliating yourself with a misplaced knife, an entire choreography is unfolding around you. Servants move like stagehands in a perfectly timed ballet. One replaces your plate, while another refills your wine without interrupting your conversation. Each step is designed to make the evening appear effortless, as though food simply appears when needed and disappears when finished. Behind the scenes, it's anything but effortless. In the pantry, a footman is keeping track of which guest has been served what, making sure that Lady So-and-so receives her favorite pheasant, and that the gentleman in the corner doesn't get the dish he's already refused twice. The butler directs traffic like a conductor, ensuring no one lingers in the dining room doorway long enough to become noticeable. If you're in a grand house, this precision is supported by years of drilled practice. In a smaller middle-class home, it's the same ritual compressed into fewer hands. The maid juggling soup tureens and meat platters, trying to serve with grace even when her arm is about to give out. As you work your way through the meal, conversation must flow, lightly, pleasantly, without straying into forbidden topics. No politics, no religion, and certainly no mention of money or anything distasteful. Compliment the food, but not too effusively, or you'll seem insincere. At last, dessert arrives, another opportunity to prove you belong here. You handle your spoon and fork with the precision of a jeweler setting a stone. Sticky fingers? Unthinkable. Eating too quickly. Unforgivable. When the final course ends and the hostess gives the faintest signal, napkins are folded, never wadded, and you stand only when she does. You have survived another evening without committing social suicide via your cutlery. And tomorrow, should your name remain on the guest list, you'll know you passed the silent inspection. For now. Courtship in Victorian England isn't romance as you imagine it. It's not candlelit strolls or whispered secrets under the moonlight. No. It's closer to being a rare insect on display in a museum case, studied from every angle, with witnesses ready to record and report your every twitch. You wake to the realization that every interaction with the opposite sex is an event, one requiring choreography, surveillance, and an invisible rulebook that would take years to memorize. You may, under the right circumstances, talk to a member of the opposite sex. But this is not talk as you know it. You will not be exchanging favorite books or political opinions, unless you enjoy scandal. The approved topics are narrow and dull. The weather, the latest society ball, a safe compliment about music. You cannot be alone. In fact, the chaperone, usually a mother, aunt, or married friend, is the human equivalent of a guard dog crossed with a stenographer. She sits just close enough to hear everything, but far enough away to make it look casual. You know she's not listening with half an ear. She's cataloging your tone, your posture, and the way you tilt your head. And yes, there are rules for the head tilt. Too much warmth, and you're forward. Too little, and you're cold. Either way, you'll be labeled. And labels stick. If a match does progress, society demands a courtship of at least 3 seasons before engagement. This is less about romance and more about background checks. Over 3 social seasons, everyone who matters gets a chance to observe you together. At dances, dinners, the theater, and decide whether you fit. Think of it as a long, tedious audition in which you're never told how you're performing until it's too late. And if you're found wanting, the match quietly collapses. Invitations stop arriving. Your partner simply fails to call, and everyone pretends not to notice, except they do. For those with a taste for subtle rebellion, there is the handkerchief code, a series of dainty theatrical movements used to send hidden messages. Dropping it deliberately means, I want to meet. Drawing it across your cheek says, I love you. Twisting it in your right hand signals, I am engaged. Twisting it in your left means, I am married. In theory, this allowed for private conversations in public. In reality, it meant hours practicing in the mirror, trying to look graceful while making sure you didn't accidentally tell someone you were married when you weren't. Imagine trying to fish lint off your handkerchief while your neighbor assumes you've just declared lifelong devotion. That's the kind of high-stakes absurdity courtship thrived on. Every interaction is performance. In the park, you walk with precisely the right distance between you. Enough space for a small table should one suddenly materialize. You never lock eyes for too long. You never laugh too loudly. The idea is to show interest without ever showing desire. This constant restraint isn't accidental. In a society where your reputation is your currency, courtship is as much about what you withhold as what you offer. Too much enthusiasm and you're desperate. Too little and you're frigid. From the chaperone's chair, you are a case study in potential disaster. She watches the way you hold your teacup, the angle of your hat, the smoothness of your curtsy. She notes whether your suitor speaks too eagerly or too often, whether his gloves are spotless, whether his hair has the right parting. One wrong detail and she will have concerns. Concerns that will be passed discreetly but effectively through the family network until the match is either corrected or dissolved. If all of this seems exhausting, that's because it is. But it works for the people it's designed to work for. Courtship is not about discovering a soulmate. It's about ensuring compatibility between families, not individuals. Love may grow later, or it may not. And yet, amid all the rules and regulations, there is a strange poetry to it. The thrill of a glance held half a second too long, the brush of a glove against yours as you're handed into a carriage. These moments, tiny as they are, become treasures, precisely because they are so rare. You learn to savor them the way someone today might replay a text message in their head, because you never know when you'll have another. Here's the truth. You are not the author of this romance. You are a character, and the script was written decades before you arrived. But you can still play it well. Speak softly, laugh carefully, carry your handkerchief like it's made of crystal. Never forget that you are being watched. And when the evening ends, when you step into your carriage under the chaperone's approving gaze, you will have done it. You've survived another day under glass, unbroken. You wake to find yourself still alive, but your husband is not. In Victorian England, this is not simply a personal loss. It is a public assignment. Your grief will now be measured, critiqued, and recorded, not in tears, but in fabric. From the moment the death is announced, you enter full mourning. A term that sounds like a state of mind, but is, in reality, a fashion mandate. For at least a year and a day, you will wear nothing but matte black. No sheen, no shimmer, no cheeky gloss that might catch the light and suggest you've laughed since the funeral. Crepe, that scratchy, lightless coal dust fabric, will be your second skin. The texture is deliberate. It dulls every curve and absorbs every flicker of sunlight. You are not meant to glow. You are meant to disappear into the background like a shadow. And there are layers to this process, literally and socially. After the first 12 months, you may advance, cautiously, into second mourning, where small traces of shine or subtle embellishment are permitted. Think jet beads, muted gray trims, or the most modest hint of lavender. You're not signaling that you're over it. You're signaling that you are appropriately progressing through grief's pre-approved stages. By the final phase, half mourning, you may reintroduce colors so muted they look like they've been left in a coal scuttle overnight. Soft grays, pale lilacs, maybe a faint mauve. But beware. Move too quickly toward brighter hues and people will notice. And when people notice, they talk. The unspoken suspicion will be that you are eager to rejoin society, and society will not reward you for that eagerness. Your clothing is only the start. Mourning dictates the jewelry you can wear, jet, onyx, or nothing at all. The gatherings you can attend, almost none. And even the way you conduct casual walks. Too much animation, too quick a smile, and you may as well have spit on the headstone. The rules are that unforgiving. And here's the thing. Mourning isn't just about grief. It's about respectability. It tells the world you are disciplined, moral, and, crucially, aware of your place in the hierarchy of propriety. A well-kept widow in full mourning says, "This household has standards. This family has means. We follow the rules." Which brings us to the unsung participants in your public performance, the servants. In many respectable households, a mistress's mourning attire set the tone for the entire domestic staff. If you are in black, the lady's maid is in black. The cook swaps her cheerful apron for something dark and plain. Even the footman's cravat may turn from crisp white to somber gray. This isn't sentimentality. It's a form of coordinated branding, a signal to visitors that this household mourns in unison. For your maid, it is a delicate balancing act. She must prepare your crepe dresses, arrange your black veils, and ensure your gloves match precisely, all without daring to question whether you actually like crepe or whether the veil makes it impossible to see the front steps. Her job is to facilitate the illusion that your mourning is effortless, even as she spends hours delinting fabrics that attract every speck of dust in London. Mourning also spills into your social calendar, or rather, the lack of it. Invitations will cease, except for the few occasions considered acceptable: funerals, memorial services, and the occasional quiet afternoon visit from an equally subdued acquaintance. Balls, theater trips, even casual shopping excursions are out. You are not just wearing black, you are living it. And because this is the Victorian era, there are, of course, guidebooks on how to mourn correctly. Publications like Cassell's Household Guide or the Queen magazine offer precise timelines: 12 months for a husband, 6 for a parent, 3 for a sibling or aunt, a cousin, possibly less, but still enough to require some wardrobe adjustments. The death of a second cousin twice removed will not disrupt your wardrobe entirely, but don't think you can skip the token black ribbon. Someone will notice. Then there's the etiquette of reemergence. After the prescribed period, your gradual return to color must be handled with the delicacy of a diplomatic treaty. Too slow, and people will whisper about unhealthy attachment. Too fast, and they'll accuse you of disrespect, or, worse, suspect you of plotting your next marriage before the body was cold. The irony. For many widows, mourning clothes were as much about protection as propriety. In an age when single women were vulnerable to gossip, judgment, and outright propositions, the black veil acted as a social shield. It allowed you to avoid certain invitations, cut short conversations, and sidestep unwanted advances, all under the unimpeachable banner of grief. But make no mistake, this protection came at a cost. Mourning fabrics were expensive. They had to be custom-made or altered to fit the precise codes of the day. The constant wearing of black, faded, and frayed garments quickly, and replacing them, was a burden. For middle-class families, a widow's mourning period could be a financial strain. For working-class women, it was often impossible to follow the rules fully. Though some tried, piecing together second-hand garments or dyeing old dresses at home. Even then, the risk remained. Too shabby, and your mourning might be judged insincere. So here you are, wrapped in your veil, every movement weighed down not only by grief, but by the awareness that your performance is being reviewed. You will walk slowly. You will decline invitations. You will keep your voice soft in public. Your life has been reshaped by loss, but also by a script you did not write, and which you cannot edit. And perhaps the most Victorian part of it all? When your mourning finally ends, and the last black ribbon is removed, you are not applauded for enduring the ordeal. You are simply expected to resume your role in society as if the past year were merely another costume change. You might imagine that etiquette was a luxury, a game for the wealthy with drawing rooms big enough to stage it in. But in Victorian England, manners trickled down the class ladder like watered-down sherry. Thinner, cheaper, but still potent enough to leave you lightheaded if you broke the rules. You wake up in your own middle-class bedroom, smaller than the upper-class chamber you've been imagining so far, but still with ambitions. The wallpaper is floral, but not hand-painted. The curtains machine-made rather than stitched by some artisan with failing eyesight. Your house is closer to the street, your neighbors closer still, which means gossip travels faster than coal smoke. The space may be modest, but the etiquette expectations, still crushing. In fact, they might be worse, because here there's no butler to smooth over your errors, no army of footmen to distract from a misstep. It's all you, your presentation, your tone, your ability to convince others that you and your household are genteel enough to be admitted to better company. The middle-class mourning follows the same general outline as the upper-class one, but with tighter quarters and fewer hands to help. You may have one maid, two if you're doing well, but they can't vanish your mistakes the way an upstairs staff might, and every choice you make, from the freshness of the bread to the shine on your boots, is part of a silent resume your neighbors will be scanning. Here, etiquette is aspirational theater. You imitate the rituals of the wealthy, but you adapt them to the reality of your budget and floor plan. The good china comes out when the right visitor calls, but it's washed and put away promptly so the children don't break it. Your husband might not have a valet, but he does have a particular way his collar is folded, because that's what respectable men wear in town. And then there's the matter of space management. A calling visit in an upper-class home happens in a vast drawing room designed for this exact purpose. In your middle-class house, it's happening in the best-kept front parlor, which doubles as the place where your children do their lessons and where laundry is folded on wet days. This means that before anyone arrives, you are frantically rearranging chairs, tucking away school books, and pretending the table has always been topped with a lace cloth and a discreet flower arrangement. Here's the delicious irony. Middle-class gossip could be far more vicious than the whispers of the elite. Why? Because the stakes were different. For the wealthy, social standing was inherited, fortified by land and titles. A few slips could be smoothed over. For the middle class, reputation was fragile, built on business relationships, good credit, and community trust. Lose that, and you could tumble straight into the working class with alarming speed. That's why Mrs. So-and-so from 3 doors down will note exactly how long it took you to return her calling card. She will notice if your dress seems a season too old, or if you rewear the same hat without altering the ribbon. She will definitely notice if your children are seen out with unpolished shoes. And because your families shop at the same grocer, attend the same church, and see each other's washing lines, your lives are open books, ones that everyone feels entitled to edit. Meal etiquette adapts too. Breakfast in a middle-class home might be served at the same table where the family dines at night, and without a footman announcing the courses. Still, there's a right way to pour the tea, a right order to serve the bread, and a right moment to pass the sugar. You may not have a formal seating chart, but everyone knows father sits at the head of the table, and woe betide the child who forgets to wait until he starts eating and walking out in public, just as dangerous for your reputation, if not more. In a wealthy neighborhood, you might blend into the backdrop of endless black carriages and uniformed drivers. Here, everyone walks. To the shops, to church, to pay visits. Which means you're constantly on display, constantly at risk of being spotted with the wrong person, at the wrong time, in the wrong part of town. Of course, there are advantages to this compressed version of etiquette. You're not drowning in quite as many rules about which fork to use at a 12-course dinner, because you will never host a 12-course dinner. You don't need to remember the proper hour to send your groom to fetch the carriage, because you don't have one. But make no mistake, the social minefield is still there. It's just disguised as casual conversation over the fence or whispered exchanges in the churchyard. And perhaps the cruelest part? While upper-class mistakes might be forgiven as eccentricity, middle-class mistakes were almost always interpreted as proof that you were not really respectable, just playing at it. That's the knife edge you live on. Every handshake, every cup of tea, every Sunday bonnet a small gamble in the game of perception. So you smile politely, measure your words, and keep your head held at the precise, respectable angle. You borrow the mannerisms of those above you and hope no one notices the threadbare hem beneath the table. Because here in the middle class, etiquette isn't just a code, it's a ladder. And everyone's watching to see if you climb or fall. By now, you've mastered, or at least survived, the labyrinth of upper-class etiquette. But there's another, quieter set of rules that runs beneath the marble floors and polished silver. Because while you've been worrying about the correct angle of a curtsy, the servants have been navigating their own code of conduct, one as strict, intricate, and invisible as the one upstairs. And here's the thing. The servants' etiquette wasn't just about pleasing the family. It was about surviving the delicate social order that existed below stairs. Break that code, and you might not be snubbed at a ball. You might find yourself unemployed, homeless, and without a reference. In Victorian England, that was its own kind of social death. If you're the mistress of the house, the butler calls you madam, the footman calls you ma'am or Mrs. Surname. The housemaid, she calls you ma'am too, never by your first name, unless you want the house's respectability to crumble like a dry sponge cake. But here's what you don't see. The way servants address each other. The butler calls the cook Mrs., whether she's married or not. It's a mark of professional respect. A housemaid might address the under-butler as Mr. in public, even if she calls him Tom when no one's listening. The upstairs world thinks it's the only one obsessed with titles, but below stairs, names are equally loaded. And you, as the upstairs person, are not meant to overhear the subtle shift in tone between work hours and off-duty. In the servants' hall, first names return. Jokes are told. Someone might even roll their eyes at your latest whim about rearranging the silverware. But in front of you, they're as formal as a funeral. You might think all servants were on equal footing. Wrong. The butler is king. The housekeeper is queen. Together they run the household's internal diplomacy. Below them, footmen, cooks, ladies' maids, valets, housemaids, scullery maids, kitchen boys, and errand runners, each with their own rung on the ladder. The unwritten rule, never overstep your rank. A kitchen maid doesn't give orders to a housemaid, no matter how urgent she thinks the task is. A lady's maid might glide into the drawing room to adjust her mistress's hem, but she wouldn't dream of telling a footman how to pour the wine. Even break times are ranked. The butler and housekeeper eat first, often at a separate table. Then the higher servants, lady's maid, valet, first footman, follow. Only when they're done do the lower staff take their turn. You may not have upstairs chandeliers, but the hierarchy is just as polished. Remember the way etiquette upstairs was partly about being seen? Downstairs, it's about not being seen, unless you're meant to be. A good servant moves silently, doesn't speak unless spoken to, and avoids intruding on private family moments. But that doesn't mean they aren't paying attention. In fact, the servant network is an unspoken intelligence system. The cook knows if the master came home late last night because she hears the door after midnight. The footman knows if the mistress has a new admirer because he's been delivering unusual letters. And this isn't idle gossip. It's a survival skill. Knowing the moods, feuds, and unspoken tensions upstairs means knowing how to avoid trouble. When the last candle upstairs is snuffed, the servant world doesn't vanish. It shifts. There are outings. Servants might meet friends from other houses in the park on a Sunday afternoon, or visit relatives in the next neighborhood. There are dances, hosted by larger estates for staff from neighboring homes. And there are romances, though these too have rules. A lady's maid might be warned not to court the under-butler because if things go wrong, the house dynamic will sour for everyone. Even flirtation follows etiquette. A glance here, a shared cup of tea there. Below stairs, reputations are currency too. You don't want to be the maid everyone whispers about in the laundry room. The servant's etiquette is invisible to you, but it's what keeps the house functioning. It's knowing who stands where in the hall when guests arrive. It's the unspoken rhythm of the tea tray arriving exactly 5 minutes after you sit down. It's the footman adjusting his pace so the silver dome on the roast chicken doesn't wobble. And most of all, it's loyalty. Not just to the family, but to the team. Disrupt the team and you'll feel it. Help it run smoothly, and you'll find protection in it. Because while the world upstairs is all about public reputation, the world downstairs is about collective survival. So when you hear the faint murmur of voices behind the green baize door, know that there's a whole society just beyond your sight. One that's been watching, listening, and keeping the wheels of your life turning, without you ever needing to see the machinery. You've made it. You've survived an entire Victorian day without committing any major social crimes. At least none that anyone has openly mentioned. The last candle is guttering low. The coal in the grate has turned to a soft red glow, and your shadow flickers across the lace-draped wall as you move. Outside, a faint clip-clop of hooves fades down the cobbled street. Somewhere in the distance, a carriage door thuds shut, and you can just imagine the whispered gossip starting before the wheels even roll away. You unbutton your cuffs, loosen your collar. If you're a lady, your maid is helping you out of your gown, layer by exhausting layer, each one a reminder of the day's obligations. If you're a gentleman, the valet whisks away your coat, brushing off invisible specks of dust as if they were threats to your reputation. It's quieter now. The house exhales. You sink into bed. A stiff, proper Victorian mattress, of course. None of this modern marshmallow nonsense. The sheets are cool, the quilt heavy, and somewhere in the hallway a clock ticks with the slow precision of a society that loves rules. Tomorrow, you'll rise and do it all again. You'll stand, Bow, incline, sip, chew, greet, sit, and walk exactly as the manuals tell you. You'll avoid windows, peas on knives, and speaking too brightly before noon. And maybe, just maybe, you'll remember your gloves, because in Victorian England, respectability is the air you breathe. And if you want to keep breathing it, you follow the code. For now, though, you're safe. The doors are closed, the curtains drawn, and no one's watching. Let the fire fade to embers. Let the ticking clock count you down to sleep. Good night, Victorian you. May your dreams be free of etiquette manuals, at least until morning.